So, Dr. Hudson, great to have you on our geopolitical marathon. And, let's get started right away because many expected the global economy to come crashing down in 2023, especially following a wave of bank failures back in March. So that worst case scenario did not materialize, but I want to ask you, Professor Hudson, how stable is the global economy going into 2024?
Well, it's really not growing and it's not stable at all. You've had rising interest rates, certainly in the United States, that has blocked any rise in home ownership. We're in the middle of a trend that's lasted since 2008 of falling home ownership here. And now that interest rates have doubled for mortgages, if somebody sells a house, the banker is going to get more money for the house than the seller of the house. So you're having in the United States a freezing of the real estate market, and real estate is really the entire financial system. 80% of bank loans in the United States and Europe are mortgage loans for real estate. So you're really not having the kind of economic growth that you expected. And when you said that there wasn't a depression that people expected, all of the polls in the United States show that 70 to 80% of Americans think the economy is getting worse and is being mismanaged. So the GDP is going up, except that it's going up for the 10% of the population. It's not going up for the 90% of the population. So what you're having in the West is a bifurcated economy. It's very good to be a billionaire. It's very good to have stocks and even bonds. It's not good at all if you're a wage earner and have to pay for your housing and your food and your consumption out of what you're earning. Same thing in Europe. The destruction of German heavy industry and as a result of the Nord Stream blow up and the sanctions against Russia have pushed Germany into a decline. And that threatens the entire euro's exchange rate because Germany's export surplus was the whole root of the that balanced the eurozone in its foreign exchange. And now, without German exports and without German earnings and off its investments in Russia and other countries to the east, you're having pressure on the euro to go down against the dollar, and the euro is becoming sort of a failed currency. So there's talk now both in Europe and America is America a failed economy? Is Europe a failed economy? That's really what one should be talking about, not simply whether the economy is growing or not.
I want to play devil's advocate for a moment because earlier this week, Biden declared that the American economy was all good. And he scolded reporters for their pessimistic coverage of the U.S. economy. And indeed, when you look at the Biden administration's rhetoric, they proudly claim that they've won the fight against inflation. And thanks to the Inflation Reduction Act, the CHIPS Act, the Infrastructure Act, they've invested over $100 billion in creating new jobs, in creating new factories, and developing new technologies to build America back better. It sounds like the U.S. economy is in amazing shape. Why are you not appreciating these great achievements of the Biden administration, Professor Hudson?
Well, who are you going to believe? Your eyes or what Mr. Biden said? What Biden criticized the reporters for was their rhetoric. Biden said it's all a question of how you package the economy. And if we package the economy with nice statistics and describe how it should be growing, we want you to talk about what our dreams are. Don't talk about the actual statistics because that's going to make people feel very bad. The fact is that anyone who goes shopping knows that food prices have been soaring, housing prices have gone up by 15 to 20% in the United States. That is, if you're renting, rents are going way up because home ownership is falling. pushing people into the rental market. The homelessness rate is really rising in the United States. So the question is, what are you going to look at? When President Biden says the economy is growing, what he means is that the Federal Reserve is pumping money into the stock market. And that's pushing up stocks. And for Mr. Biden, the contributors to the Democratic Party are the financial sector. And for the financial sector, it's doing just fine. So Mr. Biden's economy is thriving. Unfortunately, the economy for the 90% is not thriving. That's not Mr. Biden's economy, and that's why Mr. Biden's approval ratings have fallen to the lowest approval of any sitting president since World War II, or since the statistics began to be covered. So the actual people who live in the United States find that their economic position is worsening. Their cost of living is being squeezed, largely by housing and also by debt service. The arrears and non-payment of automobile debt, credit card debt, and mortgage debt are rising, and much of this debt is now 3 months in arrears. And the Biden administration has now begun to collect student loans again, which is a huge chunk of money for graduates of American schools. And they've cut back Medicaid, that is the aid for the poor. The states have stopped that about last month, and there's a health crisis, there's a housing crisis, and there's a general economic malaise was the word that was used in the 1970s and 60s for what's happening. So again, either you're going to look at the 99% of the economy, or you're going to look at the 1%. We're in a bifurcated economy.
I want to dig deeper into the question of American reindustrialization with you, because this is not just a matter of economic development and growth. This is also an issue of national security. Because as we discussed with Scott Ritter in the previous hour, NATO has significantly depleted its weapons stockpiles to help Ukraine. And Biden really wants to do as much as he can to restore those stockpiles, given that we have a lot of additional wars on the horizon over the next several years. So I have to ask you, when Biden says that we're seeing a genuine revival of American industrial might, that America is once again becoming the arsenal of democracy. Is this really the case, or is this yet another one of Biden's Potemkin villages?
Well, first of all, your word democracy. If you do a word count of American newspapers and the television, democracies used for two countries as ideal democracies, Ukraine and Israel. These are the two democracies that America are holding up to be supported throughout the world. So you have to realize that in America, when they say democracy, they mean an oligarchy, and especially a kind of apartheid oligarchy, as you're having not only in Israel, but also Ukraine. So that's part of the problem. There's no way that America can reindustrialize and even make the armaments. And I think Scott Ritter's talked about this before. How can America make the bullets and the bombs and the missiles without having an industrial base? And the industrial base has been limited. You mentioned before Biden's statement of the Build Back Better and the special pro-industrial giveaways that he gave. Not a penny has been spent on new factories. They've been giveaways to existing industrial companies. Much of the money has been spent on stock buybacks, stock options, and payment of dividends, but there's no industrialization, and there's a reason for that. I just mentioned the rising homeowner costs, the rising education costs. There's no way that there's Americans have enough money to invest in new means of production when the cost of living And the cost of doing business has been increased so much by the financial costs, the real estate costs, and the 18% of GDP that's spent on healthcare. So there's no way that America can afford to reindustrialize. It's painted itself into a corner by the idea that the way to make money and the way for an economy to get rich is by financial means, by financial engineering, by stock buybacks, dividend payouts, and by dismantling industry and moving the industry abroad to lower priced labor, mainly in Asia or the global South countries. So if this is the case, where is America going to produce the armaments, the tanks, and the arms to actually fight? NATO has depleted its stocks. We don't see Germany producing much industry because, as I just mentioned, it doesn't have the energy to produce industrial goods. And industrial goods are really a function of energy. Productivity is a function of energy per worker. And now, with the energy prices either going up or being unavailable, there's no way that you can have the technological base for either a rearmament or industrialization in general. It's irreversible.
Yeah, and I think this, helps illustrate a point that you make often in your interviews and your writing, that the United States has become a rentier economy. And accordingly, even when Biden launches these sort of industrial policy measures, in reality, these are just simulations that are used as a pretext in order to redistribute taxpayer money to well-entrenched insiders. That, all of this is extraordinarily inefficient, that very little is being produced, it's just being redistributed to existing powerful players.
That's how economies have been working for 1,000 years. What a surprise. And there really is no party that's representing the bulk of the population. There's no party that is urging for industrialization, because in order to industrialize, you'd have to go back to how America industrialized in the late 19th century. You'd have to have an active public sector, active government infrastructure. And the infrastructure in America has been privatized. And when you privatize the roads and the communication system, the educational system, you are raising the price of the basic services that have been privatized. So instead of public services being offered at a subsidized price or even freely, free health care, free education for everyone, low-priced transportation, low-priced communication, as long as you turn these into financialized monopolies, you're going to have a very high price for everything, and you're going to have a kind of bifurcated economy. You could call America not only a failed economy, but an apartheid economy between the homeowners and those who don't inherit a home from their families and can't afford one, because all of the money they get when they graduate has to go to pay for student debt, and that doesn't leave enough money to take on a mortgage. So you're really having a bifurcated economy, just as you're having the entire world turning into a bifurcated economy. This is happening on a global level, on a U.S. level, and it's happening in Europe also.
Yeah, and I just to help illustrate the problem with Bidenomics and this sort of mystical reindustrialization that the U.S. president often talks about, I think it's worth noting that one of Biden's biggest pet projects, which is the TSMC factory being built in Arizona, this was meant to be, restore high-tech U.S. manufacturing, to be sort of a signal to China and the world that America is back. But what actually happened? The project was supposed to launch last year, but it's struggling to even get off the ground due to labor disputes, because the Taiwanese executives said that the U.S. workers are unqualified. They wanted to bring in Taiwanese labor to help build a factory and produce the semiconductors. Needless to say, local Arizona officials and especially Arizona unions were outraged. So now, the project is at an impasse and no one knows, when it's going to be built, if it's going to be built. But, this sort of thing that was supposed to be the crown jewel of Bidenomics instead turned into yet another train wreck.
Well, it's not a labor dispute. It's an absence of labor. The United States, for many decades now, has not been training industrial labor. And that's because of the bifurcation of the economy. The way to make more of a living, to get a higher salary in America, is to be a manager, not to be a worker. If you're a worker, you're being exploited by the managers, and almost whether it's a university or whether it's a corporation, almost all of the growth in employment has been in management. For universities, it's been in deans, not the professors. For corporations, it's been for managers, not the actual blue-collar workers or the technical workers. So if the United States is not training people to work in industry, and of course, who would want to be trained to work in industry if there are no jobs in industry? Because industry is being financialized and the factories are being turned into gentrified housing all over the country. There's obviously not going to be workers for it, and that's part of the myth. There's been no attempt even to try to think about systems analysis. In other words, if you're going to have an industrial sector, how are you going to have the trained labor? Well, because of the age profile of America, many of the technical workers are all at retirement age now. We're now seeing people who'd been trained 50 years ago retiring when they reach Social Security age of 65, 67. And they're leaving the labor force, and there's nobody to retrain them because the universities have all shifted away to training people how to make money financially or managerially. The managers make money by reducing the wages of the people who work for them. And if you can reduce the wages, the labor cost that you pay by attrition, by working people harder, then you have free money to pay yourself. And that basically is the dynamic of the professional managerial class in the United States. And it's not a dynamic for industrial growth, but to sort of cannibalize or live off the inertia of the growth that America had inherited before the great change in the 1980s to Thatcherism and Reaganomics.
Yeah, as someone who is Gen Z, I can confirm that when I went to school, I remember my teacher saying that this was actually an interesting memory because I remember my classmates asked, why are we sending all of our factories to China, Mexico? Why aren't we producing things here in the United States? We were like 10, 11 years old at the time. And the teachers looked at us as ignorant children. Oh, how adorable. You children think that industrial production still matters. In reality, they're doing dirty jobs. You all will go on to do nice jobs in clean offices with coffee machines. You don't need to learn how to build stuff because we've moved on. The American economy is so advanced that we don't need to do those kind of things anymore. Of course, 10 years later, that turned out to be bunk, but I think it's really interesting to note that even though Biden has declared this, revival of industry, no one is trying to get Gen Z excited about factory jobs anymore. They either want to be TikTokers, YouTubers, or, be part of the professional managerial class and, work at HR or marketing in Facebook.
Well, these sectors you mentioned are not industrial sectors. They're monopoly rent sectors. If you look at the stock market going up, it's really 5 companies. Amazon and Google and the others. These are technological monopolies who make monopoly rent. That is, the price that they're selling their services for are way in excess of the actual cost of production. You can see this very clearly in the pharmaceutical sector, where it can may cost 20 cents to make a pill that is intellectual property protected, and it can be sold for $200. There's the way to get rich in the United States is not by producing value, which is created by labor. It's by finding an opportunity for economic rent. And you can get that in the entertainment industry is an economic rent. You're having all of the American industry is being all centralized and monopolized. You've had a huge merger movement everywhere. You've had a concentration of companies that dominate everything from publishing to production to information technology to the internet, and none of this requires really even university training very much. If you go to a business school, it's not how do you do industrial engineering to make a kind of analysis of what you need for a factory. It's how do you make money financially, and you make money by stock buybacks and paying dividends and by the price of your stock. So what is produced is really a financial gain, not a goods or service, not something tangible. And that's part of why the economy is becoming a failed economy, because of that. The reason that there's so little labor going into industry really was the decision made by in the 1990s by the Clinton administration to put the class war back in business, to say we're going to lower American wages by moving our industry abroad, mainly to China and to Asia. And that will enable American companies to lower their cost of labor by not hiring American labor. So if you're not hiring American labor, what's the point of having the government subsidize schools that teach people how to be a manual laborer, how to be an industrial producer, how to run a lathe, how to be an industrial engineer? This is part of the class war. And in fact, for the last 3 years in the United States, the whole idea of raising interest rates has been to cause unemployment. That's the Federal Reserve's policy explicitly. They wanted to create unemployment, to stop labor, to blame the inflation that we've been having on labor being paid too much, not on monopoly rents, not on companies charging whatever they can to make a higher profit, meaning a higher monopoly rent, but as if somehow it's labor's fault for the inflation, not the way in which the economy has been deindustrialized and financialized.
So, I mean, I guess this begs the question, because we're seeing a disconnect between America's geopolitical priorities and its economic policy. Is it conceivable that the U.S. government could somehow get its act together and restore America's industrial base and once again become maybe not the manufacturing powerhouse of the world, but at least enough to keep its geopolitical aspirations afloat?
No, it's irreversible for the following reason. As long as you leave the current debt overhead in place, the mortgage debt, the personal debt, the education debt, there's no way that you can lower the cost of production and the cost of living to be an industrial power. And the whole of American politics has been to keep the debt overhead in place, to keep the wealth of the 99% of the 1% strong. And I know that normally the idea of trying to forecast the future is, well, what's in the economic interest in countries? And if America and Europe, Russia, the Near East, if everybody follows their self-interest, how is the world going to evolve? Well, that kind of a materialist approach doesn't help anymore. Because countries are not acting in their self-interest. Germany did not act in its self-interest, and Europe has not acted in its self-interest by cutting off its trade and investment with Russia, China, and the East. And the United States really did not act in its national self-interest in deindustrializing, but it did act in the self-interest of the 1%, and it's the 1%, the financial sector, that are the donor class to the political parties and to the universities in charge of education. So the 1% is an oligarchy, and it's not in the national interest. The national interest really is the 99%. Well, that's what you're trying to see the rest of the world developing. The BRICS 10 that are going to be meeting are obviously going to see how do we uplift our overall economy for our living standards and our productive power. But that's not what the U.S. NATO garden is trying to do.
And beyond the industrial arms race, we're also seeing a technological Cold War between the U.S. and China. The United States in 2023 moved to further restrict China's access to advanced Western technologies. And China responded by restricting U.S. access to certain strategic earth metals. How do you expect this technological Cold War to evolve, to develop in 2024?
It's not really a war in the sense of competition. The United States is not trying to be an industrial country, nor is Europe trying to be industrial. It's really a split. The world is splitting between the economic objectives and how economies are organized. It's a kind of apartheid. You have the BRICS plus Asia, Russia, and the global South, all trying to do something that the United States and Europe are not trying to do. Develop housing, develop an active government sector to provide basic needs, housing, healthcare, education, literacy, raise the population, become independent in your own food production so you can feed yourself, become independent in your basic industrial needs so that nobody can cut off your source of supply and destabilize your economy. So the objectives of what the world jungle is, the European Mr. Borrell calls it, and the world garden are so different that it's not a war. It's going just in different directions. It's a bifurcation of the world. The one thing the United States is trying to do is create technological dependency on rent-seeking monopolies, especially the information sector and military technology. And if it can control the internet, information technology, microchip production, and the machines that make microchips, then they can charge enormous monopoly prices and use these monopoly gains to finance their purchase of raw materials and manufactured goods from these countries. So it would be an exchange of rent-seeking economies in the West to production, industrial, mixed public-private economies, especially countries with a large public sector in the rest of the world. It's a difference between finance capitalism and socialism, you could say.
But is this game plan likely to work? Because I look at China's statistics, right? And it's the largest producer of industrial robots, the largest owner of industrial robots in the world. We see Chinese companies significantly ahead of the United States when it comes to supercomputers, when it comes to 5G, and even, developing 6G telecommunication devices. It seems that, yes, the United States won the third industrial revolution, which came with the emergence of digital and communication technologies. But it seems that China and the BRICS countries are winning the fourth industrial revolution, which is when it comes to applying artificial intelligence and big data and fast, pace telecommunications to the industrial process.
There's a reason for that. The financial sector and that means finance capitalism, lives in the short run. If you're a manager, you're looking at the next 3 months time frame or the whole year's time frame and what you can do in a year. If you're a politician, you're looking at how you're going to get by to the next election. You're taking a short-termism, and the financial sector has always lived in the short term. It's the kind of hit and run mentality that you have. The reason that China and other countries are taking the technological lead is they're looking at the long run. And they're not trying, they don't have a financial 1% of the economy that is trying to make money in the short term, simply in unearned income and economic rent, in financial gains. Their objectives are completely different. And that's really the important thing, to realize that the objectives of the United States and Europe are not the objectives, socially speaking, of China, Russia, and the BRICS 10. It's the difference between short-termism that is financial in character and long-term industrial development that is basically how do you build an overall economy. The oligarchies being essentially rentiers, they own the land, the real estate, the money, the bank that create credit. They're only concerned about the way they make money, not the way an economy prospers.
And so I guess I do have to ask, because one of the big developments of 2023 has been the continuation of de-dollarization. We saw more and more countries switch from the dollar in terms of what foreign currency reserves they have. And also we saw more and more countries dump the dollar when it comes to international trade settlements, especially in the energy market. How big was the step made by de-dollarization in 2023? And what do you expect from de-dollarization in 2024?
The most important step was to realize that there is an alternative to the dollar. The people just assumed for inertia that the dollar was a system that was already put in place and everybody could deal. But then America weaponized the financial system. First of all, it said that if a country acts in a way that American diplomats don't like, we can cut it off from the SWIFT system, that is, the bank clearing system. We can destabilize its banks by unplugging it. When Iran tried to develop its own oil and overthrew the Shah, America grabbed Iran's foreign resources. When Venezuela tried to elect a socialist government, the United States told Britain to grab its gold supply. And most important, when America said, we want to destroy Russia and divide it into 5 countries so that it cannot support China in the coming global war, they grabbed $300 billion of Russian funds in the West. So if you could imagine what Saudi Arabia and the Near Eastern countries are thinking now. They think, well, ever since oil prices were quadrupled in 1974, 73 and 4, the United States told them, you can charge whatever you want for your oil, but you have to keep all of your extra oil earnings in the United States in the form of holding U.S. Treasury securities or U.S. bonds or minority stocks, but you cannot buy any American companies or anything important in the economy. Well, now all of this money that they've saved and built up since 1974 is being held hostage in the United States. You're having the United States and Israel now attack Syria. 2 days ago, you had the United States attack Iraqi sites in order to continue to steal Iraqi oil and to keep the air base in Erbil, you're having the United States say, we intend to fight to the last Israeli to conquer Syria, Iraq, and ultimately Iran. And you can imagine this includes Kuwait, and Saudi Arabia as well. So the Arab Islamic countries have been put on notice that all of the money that they've been saving in the form of US dollars is held hostage for them supporting American policy to take over the Near Eastern oil away from them and to essentially westernize the Islamic populations and what the Americans call a new crusade, just like the crusades of the 12th and 13th centuries, and equally destructive in their character. So, of course, they're moving as rapidly as possible to price their oil. If they're selling oil to China, they're transacting the trade in Chinese yen, their trade with Russia in Russian currency. You're having the whole non-dollar world trying to avoid using the dollar because the Americans can grab it at any point in time, and because they realize that you really don't need dollars. The reason all of these dollars have accumulated is because the United States has been pumping them into the world mainly by a military deficit. If the United States spends more dollars abroad than it is earning in exports or dividends or earnings, then you're going to pump dollars into the world, and all of the 800 military bases and the other military spending ends up in the central banks of Asia and Europe, and the central banks really don't have anything else to do with these dollars in the past but resend them to the United States. The fact is that central banks don't need anywhere near as much foreign reserves as they have. What they need is domestic money, and they can simply create their own money as China does or as the United States does. So if you don't need foreign reserves in the first place, and if the foreign savings that you have, your monetary savings, are held hostage to an obligation to follow American diplomacy, military diplomacy, and sanctions against Russia and China, then you're obviously are holding a hot potato that you want to get rid of as quick as you can. And countries are de-dollarizing, and the problem is that really in order to de-dollarize, you need a whole shadow set of institutions to juxtapose to those that are all based on the dollar. You need an independent BRICS IMF. You need a BRICS World Bank. You need a BRICS International Trade Organization. And you probably need a BRICS United Nations. You need to have a whole alternative global economy, separate global economy to the Western economy. So that's what I meant when I said the world is bifurcating into two different economic systems, and each are going to have their own monetary system, their own public-private balance, their own industrial system. All of that is part of the de-dollarization. It's not just avoiding use of the dollars, it's creating a whole set of alternative financial institutions.
Yeah, and there's no doubt that creating a new international parallel economic world order is an enormous task. There's no doubt about it. But where there's a will, there's a way. And I think it's really important to note for our audience members that the United States is not doing anything to try and reassure countries that, oh, you know, the dollar is still reliable. The U.S. financial system is still reliable. In fact, what we're seeing right now is that many people in Washington, in London, in Brussels, they're saying, we can't fund Ukraine anymore. So our next brilliant idea is to seize all of the Russian assets that we've frozen and given them to Ukraine. And I saw an interview with Nobel Prize winning economist, Yale professor Robert Shiller, who said that this would be absolutely cataclysmic for the U.S. Dollar status as the global reserve currency. But I really do get the feeling, Professor Hudson, that the people making, these sort of key economic decisions and these key military decisions are not people who have any meaningful economics or military background. They're people like Jake Sullivan, who I know, or Victoria Nuland, who I thankfully don't know. But these are these typical Washington, D.C. political science nerds. They've never done any sort of hard economic or military reading in their life. They've never, gone in the field and gotten their hands dirty. These are people who just have spent their entire career reading academic articles about, state behavior, liberal institutions, NGO government interactions. And these are the people who are making the hard decisions that will change the fate of humanity.
Well, there's a reason they're not thinking economically. Where are you going to learn about economics? You could say that economics is no longer taught in the way that it used to be taught. It used to be taught, you'd study the great flowering of political economy in the 19th century. Adam Smith, John Stuart Mill, Marx, and the whole industrial takeoff. That's not taught in the United States anymore. There's no attempt at, I don't think there were any courses in the United States, even when I was teaching in the 1970s, in the balance of payments. And I was told that analyzing the balance of payments was, my course was the only one. There are no courses in studying economic statistics or GDP in the economics curriculum. It's all about generalities. It's almost like a parallel universe. And I think it should be shifted into the literature department as a kind of science fiction, because what you're taught in economics is an idealized way in which economies presumably could achieve balance and equilibrium if only they didn't have government, and if only you'd leave everything to the private sector, meaning the 1% of the wealthy who control finance. And if you really believe that that's the result, you're going to end up like Paul Krugman and other Nobel Prize winners who don't have a clue as what's going on, and yet they're the people who are selected by the New York Times and the Biden and the Democratic Party to say, don't worry, everything's going just fine. So where on earth are people going to study how the world diplomacy and geopolitics really works? In order to understand geopolitics that you're talking about, you would have to realize, how does China think? How does Russia think? What is Russia's interest? What is China's interest? And if I'm told by people who work in the CIA and the government that if you try to say, well, wait a minute, here's what Russia is going to do, then you're called a Putin puppet. And you're saying, why do you want to, if you understand how they think, then you must be taking their side. Why would you want to understand how the Russians or Chinese or Arabs think, unless you're pro-Russian or Arab? So there's a kind of forced party line. And the party line is America's way of doing things is the only way of doing things. We're going to do this, and how do we just spread it throughout the world, as if other countries have no response at all to American foreign policy. All they can do is react to what Americans do, but they can't pursue an alternative policy of their own, because that's considered unpatriotic, even to discuss that there might be an alternative to America's way of looking at the world.
I want to completely confirm what you said about the U.S. higher education system. I graduated Johns Hopkins back in 2019, international relations. So I had to do courses about not just political science and economics. And I was genuinely stunned about the fact that, again, we didn't learn anything about balance of payments. We didn't learn anything about trade, really, about industrial production, or even basic economic history. We just kind of learned, these basic curves supply equal demand, and that's, where the price is set. And what was even more stunning was, by the time I got to Hopkins, they were progressive enough to have a course about BRICS. And so I decided to take that course about the economics of the BRICS countries. But my professor decided that, the way she should go about doing things was to teach us from a curriculum that said that Russian economic reform during the 1990s, which was dominated by crazed neoliberals, that this was actually a highly successful experiment. And her main item on the reading list was an article by a guy that later got fired from Harvard and indicted for corruption and securities fraud, I believe. And this was the main reading material. And I go up to her after class. I'm like, why is this the main one that you chose? Like, this goes against the majority of what economic historians, literature. Why did you choose this? She's like, well, I read it and it seemed kind of counterintuitive and interesting. So that's why I'm putting it on the curriculum. But again, like, this isn't like some random backwaters college. This is Johns Hopkins. A lot of these people later have gone on to work in the State Department, in the media, and you have people who are totally disconnected from reality.
Well, I think that the best thing that you could do was study what happened in Russia under Yeltsin in the 1990s. That is what happened under Yeltsin is the ideal of how the United States wants other countries to develop. You take everything in the public domain, the mineral rights, the oil, the public utilities, the electric systems, and you just give it to the managers in the theory that the managers will somehow act in the public interest. And essentially, you dismantle industry. The neoliberals and the U.S. view looks at what the Yeltsin neoliberals did to Russia as the ideal. That is the model that they would like China to follow. That's actually what they expected China to follow in the 1990s. They thought that China would be so enamored with the West that it would let the American financiers buy out the Chinese road system and the water system and everything that the Chinese government had would somehow be sold for Americans whose banks would create the credit for essentially investors to borrow money from American banks to buy and privatize Chinese infrastructure, the railroads, and then raise the prices to whatever the market would bear as a monopoly price. And of course, China would have been deluged by this dollar inflow. What would it need American dollars for? All it needs is its own currency because it wouldn't be able to buy much from the United States because the United States isn't producing much for sale anymore. So this is you can see what the problem is. If people are taught at Johns Hopkins, which is so close to the U.S. government, they publish all of the World Bank country studies, their press. What on earth would you expect them to teach except what the United States was doing is its great success, and it did succeed enormously in Russia because, as President Putin said, more Russians died as a result of the neoliberal policies promoted by the American reformers, including the Harvard boys that you mentioned, than died in all of World War II. There was mass unemployment. There was mass grabbitization of everything. Russia was Thatcherized. It was Reaganized. And of course, that's what you're going to study. But it's presented at Johns Hopkins as a success story, not the way it was in Russia as the great disaster.
Yeah, Dr. Hudson, we're coming towards the end of our hour. I have a reader question, or not a reader, a audience member question. They ask about India because India has been growing very rapidly over the past 2 years. What do you see? How do you assess India's recent economic growth, and what sort of role do you see it playing in the new emerging economic world order?
Well, there's a big election coming up in India, and India is being torn right now. What bloc is it going to associate with? The United States is making a big play to drag India into the Western bloc to use it as an alternative to China's Belt and Road Initiative. On the other hand, India is making an enormous profit buying Russian oil and reselling it as Indian oil. The problem is that the agreement it has with Russia is that it pays Russia in blocked rupees. In other words, the rupees that Russia gets for the oil that it sells to India to avoid the Western sanctions can only be spent on industrial goods. And India does not produce that much that Russia really wants. So Russia has an accumulation of Indian currency that it doesn't need. It's watching India under the current administration move into the U.S. orbit. And the question is whether Russia now is going to continue the current trade balance that it has with India while India moves westward. And if not, will the pressures be on India, economic pressures and political pressures, to move towards the BRICS that it's ostensibly a member of, or towards the Western anti-BRICS? You can't analyze what's happening economically to it without deciding how it's going to react politically. And we'll know a lot more after the election that's coming up in a few months.
Yeah. I will say a word in India's defense, because I know that a lot of people who are in the multipolar, thinking space have skepticism towards India because, as you know, that they maintain relations with the Quad. They've strengthened relations with the United States. But I think it's important to note that India, unlike a lot of other countries, is not a pushover. And I think that, even though they're cooperating with the United States right now, there are certain fundamental political contradictions that are so great that they can't be ignored. I think we saw that, bubble up to the surface as it was during 2023, when Canada, the United States, accused India of killing Khalistan separatists, that were located in Canada and the United States. So it's clear that the United States and India have differences about, what's acceptable domestic interference and not. I'm very interested to see what happens in Bangladesh in early January, because we see that the U.S. is running full court press trying to organize an Arab Spring scenario. I don't think India likes that, because India considers Bangladesh to be a country of a special interest. And finally, I do have to note, as of the recording of this episode of this stream, we see Indian Foreign Minister Jai Shankar in Moscow. And I was really surprised by his rhetoric, because he was very defiant in saying, Russia has been a partner, Russia will be a partner, and we're going to expand economic relations with Russia, that we see Russia as a long-term relationship. So I think that, Biden is going to have a very difficult time unpacking that in 2024.
Well, there'll be, we don't know how the rivalry will work out. Of course, there's, you would expect the Indian ambassador to say the nice words to Russia in Russia. We don't know what the Indians dealing with the United States will be, and the United States is trying to stir things up everywhere. It's trying to get color revolutions wherever it can. That's its modus operandi. That's the only way that it can protect a failed economic system by covert means, by color revolutions, by regime change. Europe is an example of what you would not want India to become, where its politicians have their own personal financial loyalty to U.S. diplomats not to their own country.
Yeah. And I think, at least to my relief through the conversations with Indian intellectuals, there's an understanding that Europe is not the way to go. And so, I mean, I guess sort of we have a lot of things that we need to keep our eyes on in 2024. But if I had to make any guesses, I expected pessimism in the military front for the United States. I think it's also going to face big challenges in the economic front.
That's certainly the case. And that's why people are expecting the Democrats to lose the election, which doesn't mean that Donald Trump and the Republicans can win. You're now the only political option for avoiding financialization, for avoiding a war, are the third-party tickets, and there are quite a few third-party tickets. Everyone from Jill Stein in the Greens to the RFK Jr. to Cornel West. And it's possible that neither the Republicans nor the Democrats may have enough to elect the president, and the whole election next November will be pushed into the House of Representatives, and you're going to have really an ending of the traditional two-party system in the United States.
Yeah, and so we're coming down to the final minutes of our 3-hour geopolitical marathon. I want to thank you so much, Professor Hudson, for joining us on our third hour, for giving us great economic insight. I want to urge all of our audience members to go to your website. Can you say your website so that they can go?
Michael-Hudson.com.
Yeah. And if you want to keep... Yeah, sorry.
All of my interviews and articles are on it.
Yeah.